To the Point with Michael Williams.
Crisis intervention training, a look behind a Contact 5 investigation into the training of law enforcement officers, and a reporter's view on the issues surrounding Lake Okeechobee, from algae and other discharges, and the people who deal with all of this every day. Good morning and welcome. We hope you are enjoying the end of your Thanksgiving holiday weekend. Today we're doing something a little different on the broadcast. We're going to talk to a few of our reporters who will give you insight into how they come up with their stories and the reporting behind those stories, the issues that they're focusing on now. We'll begin with a report by Contact 5 investigator Sam Smink that she recently did on law enforcement officers encountering people with mental illness or other disabilities. Here's Sam's report.
As soon as we realized that Jeremy was gone and the minivan were gone, we put two and two together, and Amy called the police.
911 emergency.
I have a 17-year-old son with Down syndrome. He's got my white 98 minivan.
We just wanted him to be safe.
5 miles from home, Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputies spot Jeremy Hutton, a young man with Down syndrome who had never driven before, driving 10 miles an hour with flat tires.
I'm sure they had their sirens blaring and their lights flashing. Yeah, and that's going to probably freaked him out.
A child who is with intellectual disabilities just does not understand.
I watched the driver, he turned the wheel, and he started coming at me.
Shots fired.
Completely drew my firearm and started firing as he reached where I was.
The traffic video shows just the opposite. Hutton driving away from the three deputies who stopped him.
Shots fired.
I just didn't envision in any way in my mind that there was any end to that situation that would end up with him being shot.
They didn't understand at all. I don't think they had much training in disabilities.
They didn't. A Contact 5 investigation found all three deputies involved had never been trained to handle people with developmental disabilities.
Stop, stay back. Stay back.
It's part of crisis intervention training.
They're dealing with assessment resolution, mental health issues, and the buzzword that's out there nowadays is de-escalation.
Get down!
Since 2002, there's been 35 officer-involved shootings with the mentally ill and disabled. 26 were deadly. In every fatal shooting, we found not one of the officers went through CIT.
The way how the training taught me is just basically to slow things down and try to get an understanding or try to engage the person into a dialogue.
West Palm Police Officer Sanjay Raja believes all officers should be trained in CIT.
You need to have this type of training on file.
He works with the police department to get all officers trained in CIT.
We have better outcomes in dealing with mentally ill or people in crisis that either armed or not armed.
Put your hands behind your back.
Florida doesn't require officers to train for mental health situations beyond the training academy. It's left up to each individual agency. Some area law enforcement don't do a single hour.
Every police officer should be CIT trained, and it should be repeated every few years throughout their careers.
There are more than 450 deputies at PBSO without CIT. Many of them are the ones involved in the fatal shootings.
If these officers were trained, how do you think this would turn out?
I think the outcome would have been considerably different. He certainly wouldn't have been shot.
CIT training could also help better protect officers.
Yet everybody goes home safe. That's my #1 focus.
The Florida Standards and Training Commission could require all police agencies to have their officers complete CIT training. We went to Sarasota to ask them why the commission doesn't.
Because it comes down to money. There's a lot of things that are pushed down from the state, from the federal government, and a lot of it's unfunded mandates.
Jeremy survived. 7 years later, the deputies who shot Jeremy Hutton still haven't been trained.
Well, we have other disabled children as well, and the next time it could be one of them.
Advocates say CIT training also saves public money. Sheriff Prummel told us he will bring up mandatory CIT training at the next Standards and Training Commission meeting in January.
Sam, reporting is part inspiration, the issues that you're attracted to, and then a lot of perspiration as you dig and look for the answers. What brought you to the story?
Well, back on New Year's Eve last year, so almost about a year, there was a shooting involving a schizophrenic man, Ricky Whitten. He had threatened suicide. He had a knife. But as his parents called 911, they said he's not going to harm anybody. He's not going to harm himself. He just kind of ultimately wants someone to talk to. Well, looking over the records for that case and finding surveillance video from a neighbor's home, you see that from the beginning, the moment the police arrived to the moment that Ricky Whitten was shot was about 45 seconds. And it got me thinking, is this the best way for us to deal with situations where the mentally ill are calling for help? It was sparked by a comment his mother made to me after we interviewed her. She said, "I wish I had never called 911. And we know, many of us do, and I'm the daughter of a former police officer, 911 can help us in many ways. So for someone to say they didn't think 911 was ultimately the right choice for their mentally ill son who was threatening to hurt himself was eye-opening. So it got me started on this journey of asking various law enforcement agencies around our 5-county area how they train. And Stewart PD was actually the ones who mentioned to me that Florida doesn't even have a standard. Florida doesn't even require you to train for mental health situations beyond the training academy. And talking to mental health experts, they went, that's just, pardon the pun, crazy, because of the very fact that we're constantly learning more and more about the mentally ill, and substance abuse comes into that category too. And the St. Lucie County Sheriff told us a lot of the times when they're now requiring CIT training and they're currently trying to get all their officers done in that, they focus a lot on the substance abuse because there can be mental issues that form from that.
A few things that jump out at me. I've heard one agency after another, sheriffs who've spoken to me, PBSO, Martin County, have said, listen, as your story illustrates, part of the issue that we deal with here is that law enforcement agencies have, in a de facto sense, become the biggest mental health providers. They have more contact with people who have mental disabilities. Their jails, in many ways, are the biggest mental health facilities in the community. Your reporting really speaks to a much larger systemic issue that law enforcement agencies, politicians, all of us living in this society, state lawmakers need to come to terms with.
Well, law enforcement, unfortunately, is usually the first person in these people's lives when they have that episode, because many times they don't even recognize that illness within themselves. And so the first person they're meeting in this crisis is law enforcement. But you're right, it speaks to a much bigger issue. It's not just law enforcement, and we're not saying that law enforcement should be trained to be mental health workers. We're just saying they can help in many ways to kind of come to some better resolutions. The National Alliance for Mental Illness, the national organization, has said that CIT training can help save the public money and can actually help divert many people with mental illness away from jails, because when an officer is trained in CIT, they're learning de-escalation skills. They're going in there, they're going into these homes and trying to find resources for you, trying to calm you down. They can get you into counseling. That counseling can keep you out of the hospitals, can keep you out of the jails.
And one of the issues that we talk about that jumped out at me is the sheriff you interviewed over in Charlotte County said, unfunded mandate. We have so many cases where people talk about crisis intervention training. Let's do it, let's do it. And it sounds great on paper, and it's like, where's the money? And that really jumped out at me. And so the obvious question to an I-team bulldog like you, what next as you look on at your reporting, as you begin to fill in the gaps on, okay, here's an issue. What are we going to do that goes beyond law enforcement and make sure the funding happens and that the training occurs?
We've sent our report to Emily Schlossberg. She is a local representative out of Delray. She's for the state, and she is actually on the Criminal Justice Commission. She was one of the representatives who helped push autism awareness and autism awareness training that is now mandatory. But again, it was pushed through, not funded. So what we're doing is we sent this to Emily Schlossberg. We intend to talk to her after the holidays and figure out not only how we can make this mandatory, but how we can give the money, get the money possible for this. One thing Sheriff Prummel mentioned to me is that the Florida Sheriff's Association, for years, a couple of sheriffs have been saying, I don't have the money to train my officers, but they need this. So the Sheriff's Association has been going out of their way to find grants that will supplement this training in various police agencies. So I think it's a lot for us to go to the lawmakers and say, we've obviously established a need for this. Now, can we should we figure out a way to get the funding for this? I mean, if they're finding grants with the Sheriff's Association, there's got to be grants that lawmakers have access to as well.
Last brief question. Let's move away from the story, which you'll continue to follow the story per se, and dig into your mind a little bit. I know that these kind of stories, and you're a database hound, and these stories, you don't just snap your fingers. You dig, you go through records. Give our viewers just a little sense, not too inside baseball, of what goes into putting a story like this together. And I know it's days and weeks of digging and going through files.
Well, yeah, it usually starts with maybe a tip from someone, and actually a lot of them start from tips from viewers like you, so I am always accepting tips, or an observation like with the Ricky Whitten story. And then normally it's taking that one sentence, that one hypothesis, and seeing, is this kind of issue happening to more people? And how can we find the records to kind of back that up? So
if they do, because sometimes
if they
9 out of 10 times you say,
It's weeks. It usually takes a good week to even realize if your hypothesis or this person's tip is real and if there's something there. And then it takes even more weeks, because I'm one of those people who due diligence. I want to make sure everything I put out there is 100% backed up by fact. And so that takes weeks, sometimes months. You're going back and forth with various people looking for the perfect records. And it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. It's a lot of passion, but it really just starts with the average viewer. And if that viewer has something they think is wrong out there and needs to be righted, I want to speak for them, because we have that arena to do so.
Well, I know your eyes are squares after looking at that computer screen and databases with your team. Believe me, they are.
Well, I have an awesome team.
Yes, we do here at News Channel 5, and we thank you for your time today, for giving us some insight to a story we'll continue to follow, and also the insight to one of our dynamic I-Team reporters. Sam, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Coming up next, reporting on a story, Lake Okeechobee, that also has such a huge impact on all of us.